watching World's Panorama, the only show that gives you news from across the globe in the most concise, direct and unbiased reports. Welcome to this week's edition with me, Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. Pakistan gives in to US pressure, agrees to reopen NATO supply routes to Afghanistan in return for massive aid and a ticket to NATO summit. New French president meets German chancellor on his first foreign trip. The two pledge to find common ground on European growth. UN observers caught up in Syrian violence while the opposition faces infighting. President Assad warns against sowing chaos. And in sports, Manchester City wins first English League title in 44 years with dramatic rally over QPR. We will be getting you the top stories in detail, but before that, this week's big story. Pakistan's president announced on Thursday that he will attend the NATO summit in Chicago, accepting an invitation that was given after the country indicated it plans to end its 6-month blockade of supplies meant for coalition troops in Afghanistan. Pakistan closed its Afghan border to NATO supplies in November in retaliation for American airstrikes that killed 24 Pakistani soldiers. The route remains closed, but Pakistan's cabinet has now authorized officials to conclude their negotiations with the US over reopening it. By going to Chicago, Pakistan hopes to ease its international isolation and boost its leverage over the future of Afghanistan as Western countries pull out their combat forces by 2014. To discuss this development in detail, I welcome Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thanks for joining me, sir, on the show. Before we get to him, here's a look at this report.
After months of blockading supplies to the US and NATO forces in Afghanistan, Islamabad has been compelled to reopen ground lines of communication through the territory of Pakistan. Following a meeting of the cabinet chaired by Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani that discussed ties with the US and the reopening of the supply routes, Information Minister told a news conference the government had not set any deadline for concluding negotiations with the American administration. A formal announcement of lifting the blockade is expected at the Chicago summit later this month. Pakistan is set to earn $365 million annually from the NATO supply line. The US in return has asked Pakistan to provide security for the supplies, which are transported using private local companies, faster customs clearance and checkpoints.
NATO is not confined to only one country. There are more than 40 countries. They are involved. We are seriously discussing on this issue. And we have received the parliamentary recommendations. Under the light of parliamentary recommendations, we are moving forward.
Even Pakistan Foreign Minister Hina Rabbani Kar echoed Prime Minister Gilani on the NATO blockade.
Pakistan's strategic objectives in the region and the stated objectives of the West or of NATO in the region, that of peace and stability for Afghanistan, is exactly the same. They are identical. So we want to continue to be a facilitator and an enabler and not a blocker, and this is what Pakistan has tried to achieve.
Pakistan closed its Afghan borders to NATO supplies in November last year in retaliation for American airstrikes that killed 24 Pakistani soldiers. Pakistan's presence at the Chicago summit is seen as important because the country is considered vital to brokering a peace deal with the Taliban and their allies in Afghanistan that would allow foreign troops to withdraw without the country descending into further chaos.
So let me get in Mr. Chaudhary here. Mr. Chaudhary, this is clearly a give and take between the US and Pakistan. Now, who out of the two in this deal is set to benefit the most in your view?
Well, I think they'll both benefit to some extent. Pakistan's primary concern is that the NATO withdrawal and the US withdrawal that's coming is not going to be the kind of withdrawal that it had hoped. It had hoped for a full-scale withdrawal that would allow its Taliban proxies to take over, but America, in fact, will continue to provide $4 billion worth of aid along with the other Western countries to whoever rules Kabul to fight the Taliban. They will maintain a presence of probably at least 20,000 US soldiers, mainly special forces, who have been extremely effective against the Taliban. So therefore, their concern is what is going to be the nature of this new Afghanistan that's going to emerge. and in Afghanistan that in many ways will be committed to fighting along Pakistan's border. Pakistan will not be able to stabilize its Afghan border. So Pakistan wants to be there at the NATO summit, at these type of discussions, so that it has a say in what exactly happens in the future of Afghanistan and to get a sense of what's happening on that front.
Right.
And the other side of it, I would argue, is that Pakistan needs money. They're desperate. Their economy is in very poor shape. Their public finances are in worse shape. But the Americans need Pakistan. It's very difficult for them, even at 20,000, to sustain that as long as they don't have the supply routes through Pakistan. And their broad strategy remains to try to get Pakistan to agree to supporting some sort of a dialogue between the Kabul government and the Afghanistan Taliban, and they need Pakistan on their side.
So more or less, they both are equally dependent on each other as far as Afghanistan is concerned. But also, would you agree that Pakistan, by giving in to the US's demands for reopening the NATO supply routes, will also, perhaps play a larger role at this time, a concrete role in the future of Afghanistan?
Well, they already are the primary international player in Afghanistan. I mean, among all the neighbors, right. It's clear that Pakistan is obviously the most important. But what did Pakistan want to do? They wanted a Pakistan-friendly government, which is virtually one that would be almost tied directly to Rawalpindi, right. Not just Islamabad. They wanted an Afghanistan that would accept and stabilize their border with Pakistan. In other words, and crucially, they wanted the Afghan Taliban to be out of their country and back into Afghanistan. They wanted all these things. That's not going to be happening in the way that they want it. It's going to be a lot more fuzzy, and particularly the stabilization of their border with Afghanistan, so they can get rid of all of this this fighting that's going on, is going to be something that they'll regret not having accomplished. And right. Symbolically, remember, Pakistan has failed to extract one thing from America, which is something that will go down poorly with the Pakistani public, is an official apology for the accidental killing of forgotten 20-plus Pakistani soldiers.
Absolutely. In fact, I was just going to ask you, with this agreement of Pakistan, does it actually mean that Pakistan has forgotten what happened in November? Because it is going to face a backlash from the opposition parties, also from, the common man on the streets.
Well, America has just refused. America has just said that, from what I've heard from my American sources, is that America was prepared to consider. You have to remember, for the Americans, the relationship with Pakistan starts to deteriorate after the Abbottabad attack. Right. Not only because of Pakistan's anger at this, but American anger, that their belief that Pakistan, almost certainly somebody in Pakistan must have been behind bin Laden's presence there. At this point, I forgot, the Salana incident takes place. Pakistan demands an apology. America was prepared to consider it. But then you had the Haqqani attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Right. And these were directly shown to go all the way back to Miran Shah in Pakistan. And Miran Shah, where Haqqani's headquarters is just a few hundred yards from a Pakistan military garrison. Right. So the American view was that Pakistan had to also be responsible for this. And so at that point, any interest in apologizing to Pakistan evaporated. And they said, well, you've done as bad as we have, so we're not doing anything. And Pakistan has eventually just had to swallow that.
Right. So also now Pakistan will be attending the Chicago summit. Tell us a bit about the importance of Pakistan being there at the summit, the U.S. inviting it, and of course President Zardari accepting the invitation. Yeah.
There, as I said, there will be a number of conferences. The NATO summit in Chicago is one. There will probably be another conference in Tokyo in June, which will attempt to finalize or to develop the framework for what will essentially be the post-withdrawal Afghanistan. As I said, the American withdrawal will not be complete, but America has effectively said we will give up on nation-building Afghanistan. We're not going to sit down and build schools and all that anymore. We will just focus on make it into a regime that will fight and keep the Taliban and keep Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda's allies away from, make sure that they're not a threat to U.S. security. So Pakistan's goal is to ensure that whatever happens there, it's not going to be in a manner that is completely hostile to Pakistan, because they know that a large portion of the Afghan population, notably the Northern Alliance territories, some of the Pashtuns, definitely Karzai, are relatively hostile to them. So if they're not going to be able to control it, they want to make sure that whoever is in power should be at least should we say, neutral, at least,
Right.
towards Pakistan.
So basically, with the latest developments, the fact has been reinforced that Pakistan and US are interdependent on each other, and in the times to come, we'll see what really comes out of this relationship. Thank you so much, Mr. Chaudhary, for joining me on this week's edition of World Panorama. We head in for a short break now, but we'll be back with more on Syrian President Assad's warning in his first televised interview since December. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. New French President François Hollande and German Chancellor Angela Merkel acknowledged differences on Tuesday over how to boost growth in recession-plagued Europe, but pledged to work together on a joint approach in time for a summit next month. The meeting between the leaders of Europe's biggest economies was being closely watched after Hollande sharply criticized Merkel during his campaign for insisting on tough austerity in highly indebted Euro countries. The new beginning for the most important relationship in Europe between Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany and French President François Hollande started Tuesday with a bolt from the blue, an apology and a sense of harmony that seems somehow more sincere for the adversity that came before it. The two leaders stressed their desire to keep the Eurozone together as political strife in Greece threatened to push it out of the club.
We know the responsibility we have as Greece and France for a good development of Europe. And I think in the nature of this spirit, we'll find the solutions for the individual problems.
We want to work together for the good of Europe, but we also want to mobilize all of the other countries of Europe. I also wanted to come to talk to the Chancellor about our work of the coming weeks and months.
Hanging over the meeting was the grim news from Athens, which is now set to hold another round of elections likely on the June 17th, after efforts to form a government after inclusive polls found dead, setting up yet another month of brinkmanship at the crippled heart of the Eurozone. The new Franco-German couple, referred to by some as Merkel-Hollande, took care to play down their differences, hoping to send a signal of unity at a time when speculation is growing that Greece may have to exit the Eurozone and return to the drachma.
Whatever we can do to structurally help Greece, to help with growth and organization, we want to do this. And I believe that we agree that Greece belongs in the Eurogroup and we want to promote this.
A French political analyst believes Hollande is off to a good start despite his substantial differences with the German Chancellor.
I think they're always going to be off to a good start in the sense that they both know that they need each other. But I think the basic difficulty for François Hollande is that he's made a big deal of wanting to change the direction that Europe's taking by shifting from austerity politics to thinking more directly about growth.
Finding himself on the hot seat from day one, Hollande is due in Washington later in the week to meet US President Barack Obama ahead of the G8 and NATO summits at Camp David and Chicago. Now, in the backdrop of continued violence in Syria, in his first interview since December, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad insisted his regime is fighting back against foreign mercenaries who want to overthrow him. In a separate development, the head of Syria's main opposition bloc, Burhan Ghalion, resigned from his post, demonstrating the disarray among groups working to overthrow President Assad. Here's a detailed report.
Violence continues to rage in Syria 14 months into mass protests and an insurrection against the rule of President Bashar al-Assad. Video uploaded to a social media website appeared to show the damage wrought on a street in the town of Rastan following heavy shelling. This amateur video out of Syria shows gunfire on the streets of Khan Sheikhoun. 6 UN monitors were reportedly caught up in the violence. United Nations staff on May 17th left the capital city Damascus to monitor an increasingly shaky ceasefire, a day after a Russian television broadcast an interview with President Bashar al-Assad issuing a warning to countries that oppose him.
You should understand, nobody here can control the borders, neither Syria nor the neighboring countries. You can't simply close the border and stop the smuggling, but you can reduce the flow. Most of the weapons have been coming in from Lebanon and Turkey so far. They have been trying to fight against it and to stop it.
The interview with Russian TV showed Assad is still standing his ground despite widespread international condemnation over his deadly crackdown on dissent.
The problem of terrorism is now very acute in Syria. Terrorists spit on reforms. They are not fighting for reforms. They are fighting to bring terror.
The decision to grant a rare interview to Russian TV speaks to Damascus's close ties with Moscow, which along with Beijing had used its veto power to shield Damascus from UN sanctions. President Assad is expected to meet Kofi Annan, who is due to visit Syria at the end of May. Assad said he intends to complain to Annan about what he called one-sided criticism of Syria.
And former Bosnian Serb Army Chief Ratko Mladic went on trial at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia on Wednesday in a case that will establish if he was responsible for some of the worst atrocities in Europe since World War II. Mladic and other Bosnian Serbs are accused of dividing the territory of the former Yugoslavia along ethnic lines and implementing a common plan to exterminate non-Serbs. Mladic is the last of the main protagonists in the Balkan Wars of the 90s to go on trial.
Bosnian Serb General Ratko Mladic went on trial on Wednesday in The Hague, facing a catalogue of charges of war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity stemming from some of the bloodiest events of the Bosnian War in the 1990s. Mladic listened intently as prosecutors made their opening remarks, running his hand across his throat in a gesture of defiance to relatives of those who died in Srebrenica.
Civilians who were targeted for no other reason than they were of an ethnicity other than Serb. Their land, their lives, their dignity attacked in a coordinated and carefully planned manner. The world watched in disbelief that in neighborhoods and villages within Europe, a genocide appeared to be in progress.
The case has stirred up strong emotions among watching survivors, with some shouting murderer and killer from the court gallery.
We hope that justice will finally get him, and that he will be held responsible for the massacres he has done.
Mladic, who was arrested a year ago and transferred to UN detention after 16 years on the run, has dismissed the charges against him as monstrous and obnoxious, and has complained on several occasions that he is too ill to stand trial. Defense lawyers called for the trial to be postponed, which was later rejected by judicial authorities.
It is not possible to read through a few million pages in 2 weeks. We were really conservative in asking for delays and we asked for the minimum. After the latest findings of how much time we need, we asked for 6 months. How much we will be given, we shall see.
The 70-year-old's appearance at the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal marks the end of a long wait for justice to survivors of the 1992-95 war that left some 1 lakh people dead. The trial is also a landmark for the UN Court and international justice. Mladic is the last suspect from the Bosnian War to go on trial here.
A short break now. Lots more world news is coming up. Greece swears a new caretaker cabinet a month ahead of re-election. Stay tuned. Welcome back to World Panorama. Let's now take a look at some of the other international news in a quick wrap.
Greece swore in a new cabinet on May 17 to lead it to new elections next month after the May vote failed to yield a coalition government. The swearing-in follows the appointment of senior judge Panagiotis Pikromenos as Prime Minister a day earlier after Greek party leaders failed to agree on a compromise candidate in the wake of the inconclusive elections earlier this month that resulted in a hung parliament. The new Prime Minister will have limited powers in the run-up to elections expected to take place June 17th, reinforcing fears that the country will remain rudderless even as it is threatened with a cash crunch and a political exit from the euro. The US and South Korea Air Forces teamed up for a joint air operation stimulating search and rescue missions for pilots in a war situation. The drill is part of the US-South Korea Biennial Joint Aerial Max Thunder maneuvers. The military exercise came as speculation grows that North Korea may push ahead with a third nuclear test after its failed rocket launch. Pakistani scientist Khalil Chisti, recently released from Indian prison in relation to the 1992 murder case, reunited with family in the port city of Karachi. Chisti had been released from a jail in India after being imprisoned for nearly 2 decades. India's Supreme Court allowed Chisti to visit Pakistan before his appeal against his conviction in the murder case is taken up. Indonesian authorities said that they had found a part of the flight recorder of the Russian passenger jet that had crashed into the side of a volcano during a demonstration flight on May 9th. The new Sukhoi Superjet 100 slammed into Mount Salak, a dormant volcano south of the capital Jakarta, last week, with the loss of all 45 people aboard.
Time now to gear up for our next report. Here's all the news from the world of sports.
Tennis ace Roger Federer reclaimed his number 2 spot in ATP rankings after winning his third Madrid Masters title against Czech Republic Thomas Berdych. Federer won the title after defeating Berdych 3-6, 7-5, 7-5. After winning the Madrid title, Federer has overtaken Rafael Nadal in world rankings. The Swiss, with 16 Grand Slam titles, will now stand behind Novak Djokovic on the ATP list after sending Nadal to the 3rd position. In women's category, Serena Williams overpowered the top-ranked Victoria Azarenka 6-1, 6-3 to win the title. Williams served 14 aces on her way to avenging her only loss in 6 previous meetings with Azarenka when she fell to the Belarusian in 2009 finals in Miami. It was the 30-year-old Williams' 41st title and second of the season as she remained unbeaten in her last 13 matches on clay. Manchester City won their first English League title in 44 years as they scored twice in injury time to beat Queen's Park Rangers 3-2, edging out Manchester United on goal difference. Injury time goals from substitute Edin Dzeko and Sergio Aguero gave City a 3-2 victory against Queen's Park Rangers to cap a dramatic final day of an exciting season. Pastor Maldonado claimed his first win in his early Formula 1 career by taking Sunday's Spanish Grand Prix. Maldonado and Williams became the 5th different driver and constructor to win in as many F1 Grand Prix this season. Meanwhile, just after the race, in an accident, 31 people were injured and 7 hospitalized after a fire erupted inside Formula 1 team Williams' garage. Governing body FIA said 31 people were treated by Catalonia circuit medical staff, with 7 of those flown out to a variety of hospitals to receive treatment. Liverpool legend Kenny Dalglish was sacked as manager of the club on Wednesday in a dramatic move by the club's owners following a disappointing Premier League campaign. The 61-year-old Scot, who had returned for a second stint as manager at Anfield in January last year, paid the price for a dismal season which saw Liverpool finish 37 points behind champions Manchester City.
After all that sports action, it's time to sit back and enjoy all the very latest from showbiz in the entertainment wrap. The red carpet was unrolled on the famous steps of the Palais des Festivals on Wednesday, welcoming the cast of the opening movie Moonrise Kingdom by Wes Anderson, including Bruce Willis and Edward Norton, officially kick-starting the 65th Cannes Film Festival. Hundreds of movies will be showcased at the annual event, where stars walk the red carpet and work the party circuit in full glare of media spotlight. Younger stars will go up against established Hollywood names for the limelight at this year's festival, with Robert Pattinson, Zac Efron, Kristen Stewart and Shia LaBeouf all appearing in highly anticipated movies. The main competition features 22 films eligible for awards, including 2 Austrian movies. Although reports say the negotiations were tough, Britney Spears said Simon Cowell's adorable ways make it easy for her to say yes to joining the X Factor. 19-year-old singer Demi Lovato will sit next to Spears at the judges' table and is expected to bring younger audiences to the show. Lovato and Spears replace Paula Abdul and Nicole Scherzinger, who were both fired last year along with host Steve Jones after low ratings. John Travolta got some good news on Tuesday as the first man to accuse him of sexual assault has filed papers to dismiss the lawsuit. A masseur had claimed Travolta assaulted him on the 16th of January at the Beverly Hills Hotel, but overwhelming evidence showed that Travolta was in New York on that day. Travolta still faces sexual assault allegations from 2 other men. Lady Gaga fans in Indonesia will be disappointed. Responding to the pressure from Islamic hardliners, the government has denied Gaga a permit for a sold-out June 3rd concert. Conservatives said Gaga's concert threatened to undermine the country's moral fibre. finally, Ellen DeGeneres will receive the US's Top Humor Prize, the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, presented by the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. She will be honored on the 22nd of October with a lineup of star performers in a tribute show to be aired at a later date. That's all from me in this edition of World Panorama. I'll see you same time next week with more world news. For now, I leave you with these visuals from Greece, where the flame for London Olympics, which start on the 27th of July after a 70-day torch relay around Britain, was formally handed over at a ceremony in Athens on Thursday. Enjoy and thanks for watching.